If you're wanting to sew a button front blouse and you'd like it to be a tad bit easier, a dolman sleeve is the way to go. We're going to be forming cuffs along those edges and we'll have a simple faux sleeve without the fuss of having to set in separate pattern pieces. We'll also be forming the front plackets, the collar and collar stand, and ending up with such a cute top. I've chosen this blue and brown window pane print cotton lawn from Fabric Worm, an excellent online fabric source. It was easy to line up those fabric stripes, especially as there are only a few pattern pieces we're working with for this design. Let's sew this free pattern together. Here we go. Here is the wrong side of one of my front bodice pieces. Along the top and bottom edges, you have 2 sets of notches which indicate the button placket. I've applied a strip of interfacing 1 inch in width right along the inner edge of the innermost notches. I'm going to finish the raw edge of the center front from top to bottom. Then I'll fold back this fabric to the right side of the bodice along the edge of the interfacing. And I'll pin the top and bottom edges. Along the top, I'm going to sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance from the folded edge to the notch nearest the finished edge, back stitching at that notch. And along the bottom edge, I'm going to sew from the folded edge to my finishing stitches with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Then I'll trim those top and bottom corners. At the notch nearest the finished edge, I'm going to snip from the notch to my stitching line but not beyond. This will release the fabric for what will become the collar later. Now we can turn this placket material to the wrong side and give that a good press. Now we're going to edge stitch from the top along our finishing stitches, stopping our stitching 3 inches from the bottom of the front bodice. Repeat the exact same process to form the placket for the opposite front bodice piece. For both of my front sleeve pieces, I'm going to form a memory crease 2 3/8 of an inch away from the raw edge, folding it to the wrong side, and giving that a press. And for the back bodice piece, I've also gone ahead and formed those memory creases for the sleeves, pressing them once again to the wrong side by 2 3/8 of an inch. Now I'll place my front and back bodice pieces right sides together and pin the shoulder seams, opening out those creases for now. And I'll also pin my side seams. I'll sew both side seams and both shoulder seams with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Before I finish the raw edges, I'm going to snip into the curves to relieve some of the tension under the arm. Doing this for both underarms. Now I can finish the seam allowances for both side seams and both shoulder seams, then press them toward the back of the garment. For the bottom raw edges of both sleeves, I've gone ahead and finished the edges with my serger. Now I'm going to fold up the sleeve to the wrong side along the memory crease that I pressed earlier. I'll place some pins all the way around. Then I'm going to sew all the way around about 3/8 of an inch away from the raw edge around both sleeves. Now that the fold in the sleeve is secured, I'll turn this sleeve right side out. And I'll fold the edge of the sleeve this time to the right side by about 1 1/4 inches. I'm going to pin at the underarm seam as well as the shoulder seam. And I'll stitch in the ditch at both seams to secure the fold in the cuff. Give your cuffs a good press and repeat to create the cuffs for both sleeves. I've gone ahead and interfaced the wrong side of one of my collar pieces. Now I'll place both pieces right sides together and pin the outer and top edges. Sew the outer and top pinned edges with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now I'll trim those topmost corners, turn this piece right side out, and give it a good press. I've applied interfacing to the wrong side of one of my collar stand pieces. And I've also attached a label. For the bottom edge of the interfaced piece, I'm going to fold that edge to the wrong side by 3/8 of an inch, giving that a press. Now I'm going to sandwich the raw edge of my collar piece between both collar stand pieces, so that the collar stand pieces are right sides together. Pin the side and top edges. Note that the inner edges of the collar will stop 3/8 of an inch before the edges of the collar stand. And we're going to be sewing over that folded edge of the inner collar stand piece. Sewing from one bottom edge across the top to the opposite bottom edge with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And I'll trim the top edges of the collar stand. Then we can turn the collar stand right side out and give it a good press. Here are my front bodice pieces opened out away from the back bodice piece so I have full access to the neckline. I'm going to place the uninterfaced collar stand right sides together with the neckline, aligning the center backs and placing the edges of the collar stand at the released seam allowances that we clipped into earlier to finish the plackets. And pin in place. Continue pinning all the way across. Then we'll sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance from one side of the collar stand to the opposite edge, making sure to leave the interfaced collar stand free of your stitches. I've gone ahead and pressed my seam allowance up toward the collar stand. Now I'm going to place the folded edge of the inner collar stand over the seam line and pin in place from the outside. Then from the outside, we can stitch in the ditch of the main collar stand seam from one side to the other, making sure as you go that you are catching that folded edge of the inner collar stand in your stitches. I'm going to finish the bottom raw edges of the garment straight across. To be able to finish all the way to the center front edges, I'm going to briefly open up those plackets. Then we can refold the plackets to the inside and press the bottom finished edges to the wrong side by 3/8 of an inch all the way across. Now, starting from where our previous placket stitches ended, we're going to start our stitching to sew to the bottom of the placket, then continue across the bottom hem along those finished edges. Continue along the bottom hem to the opposite corner, then pivot your stitches up to your previous placket stitches to finish the bottom edges. I've gone ahead and used pins to mark the buttonhole placement along my right placket. Now I'll sew my buttonholes in place. I've marked my button placement on the opposite placket. Now I'll sew each of my buttons in place. And now the top is complete. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future sewing tutorials, and I'll see you in the next video.